Tonight's program is Beef Up Your Diet and Lose Weight. It's going to be sort of a unique program tonight because we're combining a cooking class with a lecture. I don't know if we've ever done this before. It's sort of an experiment, and we'll see how it works out. I'm going to start by introducing some concepts about why a low-fat diet may not be your best choice. Okay? And then we're going to do a class around that concept of around a meal that's not low-fat, it's actually low-carb. And then we're going to go into some of the science behind this. So, I want to start off by talking about the Goldilocks Principle. And if anyone has ever heard me speak before, I always sort of start with this principle because it's basically comes down to common sense. And everybody's pretty much familiar with Goldilocks and the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And if you remember the story, Goldilocks sneaks into the house and the soup was either too hot or too cold, or it was just right, or the bed was either too hard or too soft, or it was just right. Well, when it comes to health, we need our soup to be just right. Balance is the key to being healthy. And if you don't have a balanced diet, you're definitely not going to be healthy. And so really, tonight's talk is about what constitutes a balanced diet. This is what's called the U-shaped curve, and this applies to anything, basically, that's not poisonous. Okay? Anything that's nutritious, there's a U-shaped curve. And let's just pick a few examples. Too little water, you're going to die. Too much water, you're going to die or be sick, right? Too little vitamin C, too much vitamin C, too little carbohydrates, too many carbohydrates, too little fat, too much fat, whatever it may be. This is a U-shaped curve. There is an optimal area for everything. And that's really common sense. I don't think anybody could really argue with that. There is an optimal level for anything that's a nutrient. An optimal value of nutrients exists. Too much is no good, too little is no good. You really can't argue with that. However, for poisons, there is no optimal amount of a poison. Right? Less is always better. Can't argue with that either, right? Now, there are some things that may be considered poisonous that are actually nutrients, and there may be things that are considered nutrients that are actually poisons. Now, we have what are called dietary macronutrients. This is our diet. Macro means big, nutrients, well, big nutrients. There's only 3 macronutrients in our diets: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. There's nothing else. Now, there are micronutrients, and these things are like vitamins, minerals. Okay, those are the micronutrients. So, proteins, fats, carbohydrates. What is the optimal level of each of these to be healthy? That's really the main focus of tonight's talk. And it may be different than you think. Now, what does the government say about this? This comes from the Food and Drug Administration. Now, I sort of scanned this off of a food item. That's why it looks sort of crappy. But this is today, as of August 13th, 2009. This is the latest up-to-date information from the Food and Drug Administration. Now, look at what they're saying for total fat. They're saying on a 2,000 calorie diet, no more than 65 grams. Saturated fat, no more than 20 grams. Cholesterol, no more than 300 grams. And sodium, which we're not going to really discuss, no more than 2,400. So essentially what they're saying is the less fat you have, the less saturated fat, the less cholesterol, the better. So they must obviously consider fat, saturated fat, and cholesterol to be poisons, right? The less, the better? A poison?
Yep.
That's the way I read that. Yet with carbohydrates, they're saying at least 300 grams of carbs a day. That's a minimum on a 2,000 calorie diet. And on a higher diet, at a 2,500 calorie diet, at least 375 grams of carbs a day. That seems like an extraordinary amount of carbohydrates to me. See what you guys think. Now, where did this come from? This is what's called the food pyramid. Now, most people are familiar with the food pyramid, right? Where did the food pyramid come from? What is the purpose of the food pyramid? Anybody have any idea? The food pyramid was developed by a group called the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It came about in the early 80s when this was actually started to be developed. Now, what is the purpose of the U.S. Department of Agriculture? To help the food corporations make profit. Okay? Now, here's their pyramid, and they're saying that we need to eat mostly down here. These things here, bread, cereal, rice, pasta group, 6 to 11 servings a day of these foods. Now let's think about that. That means if you eat 3 meals a day, every meal should have between 2 and 4 servings of bread, cereal, pasta, rice. Think about that. You're going to have the equivalent of 4 slices of bread for breakfast, 4 to 8 slices of bread for lunch, and 4 to 8 slices of bread for dinner. You could do that, yeah. That sounds like an extraordinary amount of carbohydrates to me. Now, on top of it, that's just the beginning. Now, they're also saying eat 2 to 4 servings of fruits a day, and 3 to 5 servings of vegetables, and 2 to 3 servings of meat, poultry, fish, dry beans, eggs, nuts, and 2 to 3 servings of milk, yogurt, cheese, and then, of course, the poisonous stuff at the top, fats and oils used sparingly. Now, do you know anybody who eats this much? That's a lot of food. If you actually ate as much as they're recommending, you'd probably be not so healthy. And guess what? We have an epidemic in this country of obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, heart disease. Is it possible that this is driving part of that? I would say yes. Now, why did they choose this as being the most important? Does anybody have any idea?
The wheat.
Fruits and vegetables. This is very perishable goods. They don't last long on the shelf. Perishable, doesn't last long on the shelf. Perishable and perishable. Okay, how about these foods here? How long can a box of spaghetti sit on a shelf? Cereal? So I'm telling you that the major reason that this group is here is nothing other than it's good for the food industry. No other reason. Now that's a little scary because they're using this to guide this. Think about that for a minute. So if you go to a nutritionist, and I hope there's not too many people here that are nutritionists that I'm going to insult, a lot of it are basing their recommendations on this, on the government recommendation, on the food pyramid. If you go to a dietitian, if you go to Weight Watchers, if you go to a lot of these different groups, Jenny Craig, whatever, it's based on the food pyramid, which is a little bit scary. And they're saying fat's poison, saturated fat is poison, cholesterol is poison, but carbs, eat 3/4 of your diet, at least 75% of your caloric intake, they're telling you should be carbs. And I'm going to show you some scientific evidence which absolutely contradicts that. This is a box of Frosted Flakes. Here's what are called the nutrition facts, just to show you here. And if you look here, 26 grams of carbs is 9% of your daily value. 9% times 11 is 99%, which is 100%. 26 times 11 is 300 grams. Well, there you go. Eat 11 boxes of Frosted Flakes a day, and you have met the bare minimum of what the government is recommending that you eat every day. So what would happen if you actually put in 75% of your diet as carbohydrates? What would happen? What does the science show us? This is an article which came from actually Rutgers University. I'm just going to give you the highlights of it. Short-term studies, plural, consistently show that raising the carbohydrate content of the diet increases serum triglycerol concentrations. Triglycerides, fat in your blood, consistently, every time we do this study. And it's compared with starches, sugars, particularly sucrose and fructose, tend to increase the serum triglyceride concentration by approximately 60%. So the worst carbs of them all are the sugars, including table sugar, and something called fructose, which is fruit sugar. So if you want to raise your triglycerides, go on that diet. Now let's look at how sugar is metabolized. You can see glucose comes down this pathway here, and it can be turned into energy, or it can be turned into fat over here. It has a choice. Fructose, however, has no choice. It has to be turned into fat. You cannot use fructose as energy. Now later on you can, but first it has to become triglycerides, which is fat. Then later you can burn it through what's called the Krebs cycle and become energy. So if you really want to gain weight, eat lots of fructose, which comes from fruit. Drink drinks that have high fructose corn syrup in it. It's extraordinarily fattening. And it will raise your triglycerides. And there's other effects which are just as bad as being heavy